Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa. With me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, tensions and violence escalate in Uganda as security forces injure members of presidential hopeful Bobi Wine's team. The biggest challenger to President Yoweri Museveni says that he'll be suspending his campaign. Also, December 1st is World AIDS Day. South African researchers have been making great strides in improving treatment for women and girls in the country worst hit by HIV. And African economies, like much of the world, are reeling from coronavirus, but behind the slowdown is a resilient reality. African entrepreneurs continuing to evolve and innovate. We take a look at what that means within the context of the pandemic and beyond. But first, Ugandan presidential hopeful Bobi Wine says that he is suspending his campaign following a violent crackdown by security services on his supporters on Tuesday. Wine says that bullets were fired at his car as he headed to a rally and that 4 members of his team were injured, including a music producer who was hit in the face by a rubber bullet. Wine, whose real name is Robert Chagunyali, is hoping to unseat longtime leader Yoweri Museveni in January's elections. Wine's been repeatedly arrested since becoming an MP in 2017. Michael Hagan joins us with more from Kampala. Michael, so what happened on Tuesday and what does Wine mean when he says that he's suspending his campaign?
Presidential campaigns have been touring the country since the formal start of campaigns 3 weeks ago, and opposition events have often been marred by a heavy-handed intervention from the security forces. Clashes between Bobi Wine supporters and security forces were widely anticipated today, and that's exactly what happened. Security forces could be seen live on social media streams, firing tear gas and other projectiles, apparently indiscriminately at Bobi Wine, his entourage, well-wishers at the roadside, and at journalists as well. Several people were injured, and when Bobi Wine, the driver of Bobi Wine's vehicle, swerved to avoid a roadblock, police and soldiers opened fire on the vehicle, and it was remarkable that nobody was killed in that incident. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control, and in that moment, Bobi Wine decided to call a halt to proceedings, said he was going to halt his campaign, he wouldn't attend his scheduled rallies. Instead, that tomorrow he will go and talk to the head of the government's electoral commission and demand action from them.
Michael, so we've seen Wine and his entourage actually targeted multiple times since he became an MP and set his sights on the presidency. Do you think that Tuesday is just more of the same, or do you get the sense that tensions are escalating ahead of January's vote?
Although violent suppression of opposition politicians has long been part of Uganda's political landscape, the scale and intensity of this form of violence is different. And it's combined with a much harsher crackdown on civil society, exclusion of foreign journalists, the exclusion of election monitors and other civil society activists. And just 2 weeks ago, at least 54 people were killed by security forces following Bobi Wine's arrest, although diplomats and some security insiders say the number could be much more. That scale of violence hasn't happened since at least 2009 in Uganda, and it's very concerning.
Thanks very much, Michael Hagan, there for us in Kampala. Now, Ethiopia said that a senior member of the TPLF from the Tigray region at war with the federal government has surrendered. Carrier Ibrahim was one of 9 executive committee leaders. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said that his troops have beaten Tigray forces after their regional capital of Mekele was captured over the weekend. But reports of clashes continue, although they are difficult to verify as communication from Tigray has been cut since the conflict began in early November. Nigerian Boko Haram extremists have claimed responsibility for the brutal massacre of farm workers in the northeast on Saturday. The death toll of the attack near the village of Zabamari has risen to at least 76. Boko Haram claims that the violence was in revenge for villagers having handed over some of its members to authorities. At least 36,000 people have been killed and 2 million displaced since Boko Haram began its insurgency in 2009. Well, December 1st is World AIDS Day. The worst HIV epidemic is found in South Africa, with an estimated 1 in 5 adults testing HIV positive. The country also has the world's biggest antiretroviral treatment program, with researchers making great strides in improving treatment, particularly for women and children. Our team reports.
In South Africa, women are more than twice as likely to get infected with HIV than men. This is partly due to gender inequalities that limit women's access to sexual health services. But preliminary results of a trial led by South African researchers hint at a medical solution at least. Bi-monthly injections of cabotegravir, an antiretroviral drug, appear to be 89% more effective than regular pre-exposure treatments.
You know, kind of in my career, it's been one of the most impressive HIV prevention results I've seen for women. And I do think it has a significant potential to reduce or even eliminate HIV acquisition in women.
South African scientists have also been working on treatments for infected children.
We know that giving medicine to a child can be challenging.
The pharmaceutical industry now produces strawberry-flavoured granules that are far easier to swallow than big tablets. For this boss at Cipla, treating children brings its own set of challenges.
Technically, it's also difficult. You have to remember that a child that weighs 5 kilograms takes a totally different dosage to a child that is 7 kilograms or 10 kilograms.
Free AIDS treatment in South Africa has only ever been possible due to the tireless work of activists. Today, only 1% of HIV-positive mothers pass the virus on to their children. Without treatment, the rate would rise to 40%. Glenda Gray was among the first doctors to start treating HIV-positive pregnant women in Soweto back in the 90s.
We did this at the time when the government was denying that HIV caused AIDS. And so to work in that area and to work in that time was subversive.
Thanks to scientific progress and public will, AIDS is now treated like any other illness in South Africa, and the medicine is only becoming more efficient.
Well, Africa's economic development, like much of the world, has taken a devastating hit because of the coronavirus crisis. Nations everywhere will be struggling to recover from this turbulent year. But zoom in, and small businesses, business people, and innovators, particularly in poorer countries, are facing hardship. But behind the slowdown is a resilient reality. African entrepreneurs continuing to adapt, create, and contribute. Pascareena Morty is one of those behind a recent study on the indomitable evolution of African innovators. She joins me now to talk a little bit more about what she found. Pascareena, thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, throughout the pandemic, there's been a lot of concern and discussion about the hurdles faced by the continent. But you're keen to highlight that Africa has been seizing opportunity as well. How so?
Indeed. Globally, everyone has been hit hard by COVID-19, and Africa is no exception, with entrepreneurs and small to medium-sized businesses who are the backbone for economies globally and representing up to 90% of some of the economies in Africa have been some of the hardest hit by this pandemic. This report, which Jembe Consultants collaborated with AfriLabs to develop, it set out to fully understand how entrepreneurs, who are the single most important enabler of innovation in Africa, and across key industries such as healthcare, digital technologies, agriculture, and financial services, have been affected by this pandemic. It's important to also mention that pre-COVID, the innovation ecosystem in Africa was growing and was more dynamic in scale and value than ever before. And this was as a result of the increasing use of technology and a more enabling environment, which gave rise to African innovators come up with solutions to address some of the local challenges that we face in the continent. With this report, we set out to ask entrepreneurs and leading experts pertinent questions around what really matters to them most during this time, so that African decision makers from both the public and private sector can continue and, most importantly, accelerate support across the full innovation spectrum. And we're talking from education to inclusivity, investment policy, as well as research and development. Our report, which is titled Building a Resilient, Innovative Africa, is in direct response to this unprecedented global crisis and how we can build back better from this. Resilience has always been part of our DNA in Africa. As before COVID, even with the scarcity of resources in Africa, we're used to doing so much with so little. And in speaking to over 1,000 entrepreneurs, innovators and startups across Africa, what we saw was that despite the turmoil created by the pandemic, many African innovators have seized this opportunity and risen to the challenge, demonstrating that innovation spirit and drive that is inherent in the continent to become part of the solution in tackling COVID. And I just want to highlight some solutions here. There's one from Kenya. A 9-year-old boy in Kenya created this wooden hand washing machine in a village in Western Kenya. It uses a foot pedal so that users do not have to touch the surface. So the foot pedal dispenses liquid soap and tips a bucket of water. Again, in Kenya, another invention is a wooden money sanitizer, which has been invented to clean notes that pass through a slot machine, in a slot in the wooden machine. And another is a solar panel hand washing sink featuring a hand sensor from Ghana. These are just some of the most unusual and innovative creative solutions, with many of them embodying the African innovation, spirit of innovation and inherent resilience in the face of adversity that